Hello, everybody. It's me, the Boss Hog, and this is episode 2 of Grinds My Gears. Today, I'd like to talk about those companies that moralize. And by the way, I might have to do a future episode on this, but something else that really grinds my gears is the fact that American spell checker has become really confrontational over the last couple of years. Like, moralizing to me is with an S, and color has a U in it, and etc. I wish they would stop trying to tell me how to spell English words, but there you go. That's for a future episode. What I want to talk about this time is companies that preach, and it kind of annoys me. I know, like, we touched on ESG investing last week, and everything wrong with that in my opinion. But to me, this is a separate point, and there's a couple of areas that I want to cover. So first of all, I want to touch on those companies that basically once a year will change their logo on LinkedIn to the pride colors or something, right? A rainbow color, or like acknowledge some kind of month or day or something along those lines, right? Like, this is a company that doesn't care about these things, right? It kind of reeks of hypocrisy. Like, at least if you're a business and you really do care about this stuff, right, really live it, right? Convince me that you're this champion of gender causes or sexual identity causes or whatever it is, right, that you choose to pin your banner to. Again, I still think that's flawed. Excuse me. I still think that's flawed as a business, and I don't really like that attitude. But I think the first thing that really grinds my gears here is like that hypocrisy that just turns up once a year and goes on from there. It's like people who take out their partners for a Valentine's Day dinner and act all romantic, right? Like, you're doing that once a day, right? What about the other 364 days of the year, right? It's similar with companies as well. Like, you just get this PR team that will come out, and then it's like there's like a little mutual circle jerk or something with marketing departments, because you see like individuals, oh, it's so brave. Oh, Nike's got a multicolored rainbow. That's really, really bold. Like, championing sexual liberation in the Western world is such an easy championing issue to do, right? It's like they may as well just put out a message that's like, yeah, Nike doesn't believe in microwaving baby kittens, right? Because it's equally inane and stupid. It like doesn't really mean anything. It's not a brave stand at all. You're basically, at best, taking a position that you hope will bring in some sales, right? But actually, like, if you look at the data, this kind of stuff, like, yeah, some people love it, just over a third. Some people hate it, just over a third. And the other third couldn't give a shit, right? It's like they just want their shoes or whatever it is, right, that they're buying from. It's like, I follow this guy on LinkedIn. He's from like a very well-known pharmaceutical company, right? And it's like, what is that pharmaceutical company getting involved in gay causes for, right? It's like, I don't go to get my drugs. I mean, I'm British, right? So I can just get given whatever the NHS decides it can afford. So it's like, I don't care. Like, what's it got to do with anything, right? Just make medicine that makes me better. It's like, it's as simple as that. So yeah, that's definitely the first thing. These sort of PR departments that turn up and then they all like sit around and say, oh, so brave, you did such a good job. Like, no, it's such an easy win. And it's an easy win. It doesn't require any real effort. And once a year, you just make it a rainbow flag or whatever other cause, again, you want to highlight. I've seen tons of them, honestly. And we move on with our lives, right? The company doesn't change. The world doesn't change. And that hypocrisy really pisses me off. The other kind of hypocrisy that always annoys me with these companies is like they preach, like do good and contribute and everything else, whilst engaging in some of the worst and most morally grey tax avoidance you can imagine, right? Like they hire teams of people to contribute as little to society as they can, right? And don't get me wrong, that's exactly what they should be doing as a business, right? Like, their job is to maximize shareholder return, as I touched on in my previous episode. My point, though, is that just go and do that, right? But then don't pretend that you're something other than kind of a fairly normal manifestation of capitalism, right? Like, don't get me wrong, businesses can and do make tremendous contributions to society, but one of those things should be making sure you pay your taxes, right? And everything else. It's like, stop telling me to do better when you're not doing better, right? Like, I'm just an individual. You're a massive company with thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. Like, you need to do better, right? Like, if you actually stepped up and really delivered on the kind of stuff that you tell me I should be delivering on, the world would be so much better, right? But you don't really believe it. You don't really do what you preach, right? And again, like, if you really wanted to contribute to society, start paying your fucking taxes, right? Like, that would be a real improvement to start with. Likewise, stop pretending that table tennis tables or bean bags are somehow like really good for like staff empowerment, right? Like, it's like, That's not empowerment, right? Paying people properly is empowerment. Clapping for them is not empowerment, right? Like ultimately, if you're a business, you know as an individual how much the business values you. And do you know how you know? It's in your freaking pay packet, right? Like that's ultimately the business's how they value you. Everything else is just a distraction, honestly. And businesses know this, by the way. So again, it kind of like then pisses me off when it's like, oh, you're doing such a great job. Well, thanks very much. Does that mean I'm worth more money? Like, no, we don't really believe paying people a reasonable and salary that they can actually afford to live on is part of our social cause. Like, no, like it's not. Like, but changing your logo is like putting out public statements condemning something which may or may not be worthy of condemnation is. It's like, no, like just do your job, right? You've actually got a fairly simple thing to do, right? Take your input costs. There's your outputs. If you can make money between those 2 points, good for you, right? And ultimately from that, you've got a viable business. And within that viable business, I expect one of those input costs to be labor, right? It's like, okay. And, don't get me wrong, like part of that labor should be making sure that if you are gay, that you feel reasonably comfortable working there, right? Like being gay is a sizable minority of a population, right? We should absolutely make sure that those people are accommodated. Of course we should. But, again, that's part of your normal HR business. Like I'm not going to applaud you for doing something that you should be doing anyway, especially, again, when you're like throwing up distractions and smoke screens and everything else, right? Like just stop it. And I guess the other thing that kind of annoys me is not necessarily just the companies themselves. It's like the management consultants and the kind of pressure groups that kind of really champion these businesses, right? And they're like, oh, these businesses, they're doing such a good job, right? They're successful because of these policies. Like, no. Like, first of all, like a lot of these businesses aren't as successful as you're pretending they are. But really, and like Peter Thiel does a really good job of explaining this, right? Most businesses on a day-to-day basis are engaged in a fight for their survival, right? Like there are millions of businesses that you've never heard of that are just trying to get in enough cash flow that month to pay their staff and their suppliers, right? That's it. Like that, they have not got the time, the energy, or frankly, the money to start championing anything, right? They're just trying to survive and add value, right? They pay their taxes is a good one. And so it's like, okay, that's clear, right? But do you know what's not going to help them be more successful? Employing a team of PR people and branding people, right? Oh my goodness, like that is such a distraction for most companies. Like the only companies who can afford to engage in these kind of like social missions are so fantastically successful that they throw off so much money that they can basically use this as a distraction. And that's what they're doing, right? Like your mum and pop store, like sure, they might employ somebody who's gay. Actually, they might not, right? We can't force them to hire somebody. Maybe you can, right? That's an interesting point as well. But would you want to go into that kind of environment? Probably not. But like these big businesses, they should just be hiring whoever ultimately gives them the best return, right? So that's something. But I think it's like this idea that the successful companies are successful because they have these kind of programs and departments whose only job is to put fluff on turd. Like that's just it's not the right way around. And I feel like a lot of people in that industry actually know this. It's dishonest, right? Again, you look at like the likes of Google and they do no evil. Like first of all, it's like, come on, like Microsoft's been operating in China for years and never gets pulled up on anything, right? Do no evil. Come on, like you guys are again engaging in some of the most morally dubious things you can imagine, and you can get away with, right? Because to be clear, they're not illegal. But then don't start telling me what I should be doing when again you're hardly that paragon of virtue and well behavior. It just again, that hypocrisy, it really pisses me off. Like when I look at like successful businesses, like if I think of like Ryanair, right, the airline, right, that is a business that makes no bones about what its job is, right? Its job is to get people from A to B. You get a pretty good value seat. And if you want anything else, well, actually, it's going to cost you extra because their business model is ultimately your bum on seat. And that's about it, right? They'll get you there without crashing. But if you want anything else, you're having to pay for it, right? They don't pretend to be anything else. O'Leary is sometimes a bit legendary in some of his comments that he says, right? That to me is like, it's a business, right? It knows its mission. That's okay. Like one of my businesses, like Games Workshop, like their mission statement is incredibly refreshing. It's like, our job is to provide fantasy miniatures that people enjoy playing with, right? And the lore that just feels good. It's like, great. And that doesn't stop their company updates from mentioning that they're kind of reducing their carbon footprint, that they're kind of giving their staff bonuses. And again, like Games Workshop is a good example, because during COVID, when a lot of retailers let their staff go, they actually kept theirs employed and told them to read up on lore and do some painting, right, to make sure that they had the best the best people, right? They pay very well for retail. So, if you do care about that, then fine, right? Live it and everything else. But I think like this situation where big companies get so big, they almost have more money than they know what to do with. So they're like, actually, we kind of need to not get the ire of, the tax man, right? We don't want the media running a campaign. Like, what should we do about this, right? Should we actually improve the situation in society in our company? And it's like, no, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do, get this, guys, we're going to change our logo and we're going to pretend like we're really making a statement. It's come on. Like, I feel like, again, like we as a society need to be more upfront about this bullshit, right? Like, don't accept smoke and mirrors. Like, call it out when you see it, right? It actually makes people feel quite uncomfortable when you call it, right? That situation with the circle jerk on LinkedIn, I actually used the reference of microwaving kittens because, again, it's like it's so visceral, right? It's like a deliberately provocative as a concept, but it also kind of highlights just how, again, inane these things are. Like, you're not making a bold statement by saying that, because actually you have to be pretty much a psychopath to microwave a kitten, right? And it's kind of similar with this situation, right? Call it out. Like, people don't like it being called out, right? Because they get employed to kind of do this smoke screen. But like, we as people and we collectively as a society need to be a lot more open and demanding when companies say something, but then their actions say something else, right? Like, don't let companies get away with that. So I wanted to talk about that. I think it's ridiculous that this is a thing. It annoys me when companies pretend to be something they're not. And I think there's a whole cottage industry of often aggrieved, socially minded people, sometimes with good intentions, but their job is to basically do PR, obfuscation, and distraction for very large, powerful, and at best amoral businesses, right? So that's it. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I've been the Boss Hog, and this has been episode 2 of Grinds My Gears. Bye for now.